So Emily comes to us from Canwea, so one of our Canadian guests here in Alaska. In her role at Canwea, she oversees small wind technology and also wind diesel, specifically in the northern climates. Emily, before joining Canwea, recently worked at the Sierra Club, primarily focused on climate change advocacy and legislation. So Emily is going to give us a quick review of wind diesel activities and governmental role in wind diesel activities in Canada. Emily, thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first wind diesel workshop. I actually started with Canwea in July 2009, which was, I think, probably a week after the Ottawa workshop on wind diesel. So I missed that one, and so I'm really happy to be here in Alaska attending this workshop. As Ian mentioned, I'm just going to be talking about some of the policies that we'd like to see be put in place in Canada. We're actually playing catch-up with Alaska and other jurisdictions on wind diesel. So a lot of our work is around advocacy, trying to get governments involved in supporting wind diesel. So just very briefly, my role is I work with the Small Wind Committee within Canwea, which is what the wind diesel activities fall under the Small Wind Committee. So just very briefly about Canwea, we have more than 420 members, most of whom are in fact focused on utility scale wind. We do have a Small Wind Committee, which is composed of manufacturers, service providers, installers and dealers, and as I said, that group also focuses on wind diesel. How do we define small wind? Essentially 300 kilowatts and under. And one interesting statistic is that about half of the manufacturers of wind turbines in the 30 to 50 kilowatt range are in fact Canadian. So we see this as really a tremendous opportunity from a manufacturing perspective. And we also see essentially the small wind market as being where the large wind market was 10 to 15 years ago. So really a lot of potential there, and we are working on building that market in Canada. Just a few of the small wind manufacturers who are members of Canwea. As you can see, there's a few who are Canadian-based that are in that mid-size range, as well as a few U.S. manufacturers as well. So just very briefly about wind energy in Canada. At the end of 2010, there was about a little over 4,000 megawatts installed across the country. And as you can see in the north, very small amount of installed capacity. Canwea has developed what we call Wind Vision 2025, and we'd like to see essentially 20% of Canada's electricity demand to be met by wind by 2025. There's obviously huge land mass, excellent wind resource in Canada, so a tremendous opportunity there. The impacts of this would see 55,000 megawatts installed across the country, with a minimum of about $79 billion invested in Canada's economy, and a minimum of 52,000 new jobs, with significant savings in CO2 emissions. So what about northern and remote wind? There are about 300 northern and remote communities in Canada for a total of about 200,000 people. Obviously, the electricity they're all dependent on diesel generation, and the electricity is highly polluting and very expensive. Communities can pay up to $1.50 per kilowatt hour. However, in a lot of cases, this electricity, the diesel, is subsidized, so they're actually not, a lot of communities are not paying for the true cost of power. Obviously, other drawbacks are significant air pollution, ground spills, and very few local benefits associated with that. Clearly, the experience here in Alaska shows that the technology is ready, as well as a few projects in Canada, such as Ramia. So the technology exists, it works, and Canada also has a lot of expertise. And we also have the wind turbine manufacturers. So as well as the institutions, which is the Wind Energy Institute of Canada, based in PEI. So why hasn't this happened yet? Because to date, there's been a few sort of piecemeal projects, but no comprehensive critical mass of projects. Obviously, it's very hard to displace an incumbent technology. Diesel generators are very familiar to the communities. And as I mentioned, fuel is highly subsidized by the federal government, especially the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs. And so there's sort of the bureaucratic funding models are very well established and difficult to displace. In addition, the utilities in those communities are only willing to pay the avoided cost of diesel. And they're not willing to factor in other benefits associated with displacing diesel, such as the cost of pollution. As I mentioned, we haven't been able to get critical mass of projects. A lot of projects in the north have been sort of for demonstration purposes and have not been maintained once the initial funding ran out for those projects. And really there hasn't been sort of a global comprehensive program to get sort of regions mobilized and working together in the same way that has been done in Alaska. In 2002, there was a federal incentive program that was introduced to support wind in general, and it was essentially 1 cent per kilowatt hour that was offered. And it was tremendously successful for utility-scale wind projects in the southern parts of Canada. And that was really sort of the incentive or the boost that allowed the wind industry to really come to full maturity in Canada. And it was tremendously successful, and all the funding was allocated early. This funding program actually ended last year, or all the funds were allocated. Unfortunately, this wasn't sufficient to really boost any projects in the north. So as a result, there were absolutely no projects that were done under this program, no wind diesel projects. It just wasn't sufficient. So what is it that we do need? So CanWIA has developed what we call the Northern and Remote Wind Incentive Program, or also known as NORWIP. This is sort of a collaborative development that CanWIA put together in consultation with communities, environmental organizations, the different government departments, Natural Resources Canada, Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. And for the last 3 or 4 years, it has been part of our official ask to the federal government. So previously, we were looking for the renewal of that 1 cent per kilowatt hour incentive by the federal government, and NORWIP was sort of a subsection of that ask. Last year, as I mentioned, that 1 cent per kilowatt hour incentive wasn't renewed. So this year, NORWIP is really sort of our main ask to the federal government. This incentive is really sort of tailored to the specifics of northern and remote communities. Obviously, it acknowledges that the projects are more costly than those in the south, that there are lower capacity factors. And we've also designed it based on lessons learned here in Alaska and other successful examples of wind diesel. So how is it, what are the specifics of NORWIP? It recognizes that there are at least 2 different project types. So one type is for large communities as well as industrial facilities in the north, with sort of medium energy costs and with approximately capacity of 2 megawatts or higher. So NORWIP would look to support 6 projects of that size range if it were implemented. The other section is NORWIP would look to support small remote communities with extremely high energy costs with average projects of 300 kilowatts. So essentially NORWIP has about funding for 20 such projects. It also builds on the Alaskan model of hub and spoke. where we would start off with sort of leader communities and build on those successes and then go into spoke communities. So essentially, the program would offer $250,000 capital grant upon completion of a feasibility study. And for large northern communities or industrial facilities, so mines would be the most likely ones, it would offer a capital contribution of up to $1,000 per kilowatt, or 20% of the total project budget. For small and remote communities, it would be a capital contribution of up to $4,000 per kilowatt, or 30% of project budget. So this is sort of a second iteration of what our proposal is to the federal government. We had initially designed this program as a production incentive, which we felt would be more of an incentive to maintain the turbines and maintain the projects. Unfortunately, we came to understand that it's actually too burdensome for the bureaucracy, and that sort of a grant system would be much easier to sell to the government, in essence. So total costs and impacts. Norwip would cost about $63 million over 5 years. The direct impacts would be 26 new wind projects in the north for a total of 47 megawatts of capacity, and a total of $500 million in total diesel fuel savings over the lifetime of the projects, so about 20 years. This would also essentially provide 8% of demand of electricity in remote communities would be met through wind, for a total of 80 kilotons of CO2 emission reductions per year. In addition, as I mentioned, there is a strong manufacturing presence of small wind turbines in Canada, so this would also foster the development of that industry. And it would also assist, obviously, remote communities in diversifying their energy and stabilizing electricity prices. In addition, the current Conservative government in Canada has a high priority of Arctic sovereignty, so this would fit very well into that strategy as well. So in the past, we've actually launched a letter signing campaign for support of Norwip, and we've received a lot of support from communities, from utilities, as well from certain mining companies, essentially expressing their support for an incentive program for northern and remote communities. So these are just some of the communities that have expressed that support, as well as different governments that have signed on for support of it, and environmental organizations, as well as the Mining Association of Canada, since it would benefit industries in the north as well. Just wanted to mention as well that there are several provinces across Canada that are increasingly interested in wind diesel, since there are quite a few off-grid communities across Canada's provinces. So Hydro-Québec, we did mention, we saw one project in the Île de la Madeleine being mentioned earlier. They're looking at doing 2 projects right now. Ontario has also expressed interest. They have approximately 25 off-grid communities, and this is something they're interested in pursuing further. However, they've also mentioned, a lot of these communities have shared jurisdiction with the federal government, so a lot of provincial governments aren't willing to move forward without support from the federal government. And finally, British Columbia is also looking at possibility of supporting a program for integrating renewables in their off-grid communities as well. So just in summary, utility wind has a very bright future in Canada, but we do see the opportunity for northern remote wind projects as actually even greater than utility wind, in that there's that the perfect hand of the technology being there is a need, as well as the expertise. But as I mentioned, there are a lot of challenges out there. And what we need to really do is sort of build momentum across the country and get that pressure on the federal government to essentially get them involved in deploying these projects and supporting it. And we see NORWIP as being that catalyst. So essentially, I'm here to sort of talk to everyone and learn about the successes within Alaska. And I think one thing that would be really useful is to show to sort of leaders within Canada what the successes have been here in Alaska, and to really highlight that. I think that's one thing that we could really use the help of people here is to get that message across that wind diesel is happening and that there are tremendous benefits to it, and that the 300 communities within Canada that are currently relying on diesel fuel for their electricity could benefit tremendously from this. One idea would be maybe to get some regional leaders to cross the border and come see the projects here in Alaska, to see firsthand what those benefits are. So I'm open to any ideas for collaboration, because I think we do need your help in Canada to get this forward, to move this forward and get projects in the ground. So I guess that's it. If anyone has any questions, it's my contact information. And I did just want to mention that our annual conference is taking place in Vancouver in October, October 3rd to 6th. We will have sessions on small wind and on wind diesel, and our call for abstracts is currently open and will be open until March 23rd. So I encourage everyone to submit abstracts, and once again, it's a good opportunity to sort of profile the successes of wind diesel elsewhere, so that Canada can learn from these successes. So thanks very much.
Any questions? Is that a question coming up? All right.
With the NORWIP project, can you speak to how that funding might be allocated? Is this going to be an open solicitation program? Is it going to be need-based? Is it going to be based on lifetime cost of energy? Do you have any idea of how that might work?
I think it would be open solicitation, but it would really go towards those communities that are seen as hub communities. So it would obviously depend on local capacity, as well as whether there are leaders within those communities who are willing to champion the project. I think that would be sort of the most important piece in allocating that funding, is really to go towards the what we would call hub communities, where there are champions for the project who are willing to see those projects through. So it would be more of actually a bottom-up way of allocating the funding. Yeah.
Any other questions? So one quick one before we break. What are the chances, in your professional opinion, and when would kind of news of this start getting out in regards to whether it was happening or not?
Well, there certainly is interest. Now, whether this is something that the federal government wants to be funding is a different issue altogether, given that this year's budget is going to be highly restrictive. But the federal budget this year is coming out March 22nd, so we'll be looking to see if there's anything in there. So that's sort of the next benchmark. But again, there's no guarantees, but that's what we're looking towards. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Emily.
Okay.